what I love doing more than anything is building product and working on the product and, building software that makes people excited. And I think the way to have our cake and eat it too is to take the smallest amount of capital that we need in order to grasp the opportunity.
So I have some experience using Movemint. I've been working with Colleen Quigley on her team, Meridia. We launched a virtual mile called the Meridia Mile a couple of months ago. And we've both been so extremely impressed with the platform and the ease of use and how simple it is to sign up, how simple it is to manage, and then some of these additional features that you've built in, right? So she's using the event as a call to action to join the team, participate with the team, be a part of the team. But the platform also has allowed donations to exist. It's allowed other things to be sold through the registration process, including buying an hour of time with a coach or buying an hour of time or 30 minutes of time with a couple of the athletes on the team to chat through their own, your own training and whatnot. And so it's cool that you've built this platform and ecosystem that enables more than just the event itself to take place. So how did you begin to think about what you wanted that product or that solution to look like? And how did you go from idea and ideation to execution?
Sure. So I can't say that when we launched, we had product market fit. I don't think I've spoken about this publicly yet, but before we launched Movement, the events platform, Movement.cc was a completely separate idea. And so I worked on a GoFundMe for athletes product, and that's what Movement was. And we launched in, I think, May of 23. And, it was mildly successful. We had some of the best endurance athletes in the world use this thing. Like Dylan Bowman was a big supporter of ours. Kristen Faulkner, who won the Olympics just now in Paris, was on there. Amity Rockwell, Ted King. But I just didn't feel like it was going to be a sustainable business for us. Not because GoFundMe for athletes is a bad idea, but because our implementation we did it in a crypto way that really narrowed our TAM and was just not smart. And that's why the MINT is mint, is because we were minting NFTs. And so I remember having a conversation with Michael Horvath, who's now super involved with Movement, who co-founded Strava. And he just told me straight up, he was like, you don't have product market fit. And that was really depressing. But I was like, you're right. And so from November until January, so November 23 until January 24, I started by saying okay, I want to solve a problem that I know there's going to be product market fit. I don't want to just create a new market out of nowhere. And so what we did was we created these landing pages for different parts of the endurance event lifecycle of if you're a bike race organizer, sign up here to learn more. Or if you're an athlete interested in events, sign up here to learn more. And we made 6 or 7 landing pages, but no product. And I put a couple $100 of paid ad spend behind those to see if people would actually be interested in signing up. And 1,000 plus people signed up. And so I was like, okay, this is a real need. I have signed up on these other platforms and had a crappy experience. And I started talking to organizers and realized that they were also having a really tough experience with these platforms. And so from November until January, I just wrote code and just grinded. And then we launched in January. We had a press release and we won our first 3 big customers from that press release, and they're all still with us.
Yeah, the pivot is interesting. I do think that there's an appetite for GoFundMe for athletes product. Dylan has talked a lot about this as it relates to free trail and scholarships versus fundraising and creating revenue streams for athletes. Why didn't you pivot into or was there discussion around pivoting into more of a traditional finance model versus crypto and NFTs, right? Because I think also if you had stayed with crypto and Bitcoin price at the moment of 2022, all those athletes would be rich.
Yeah, you're right.
Oops.
Yeah, I know. Bad timing.
It's at an all-time high right now. But anyway, I digress.
I think that somebody could definitely figure out that problem. It's not an impossible problem. And athletes provide us as fans with so much value and receive so little in return. I think that you could get people who are interested in sponsoring athletes. The reason we didn't stick with it isn't because we couldn't have done it with a normal financial, just paying with your credit card to support athletes. It's because through that process, the thing I learned, especially from women athletes, is that they just didn't want to have to interact with their potential supporters, and that there was a big worry about creepiness and just that becoming a second full-time job. And so it didn't feel like there was enough appetite from at least the athletes who we interviewed and were on the platform that they wanted to like interact with their fans.
So the model there would have been you need, 100 athletes who are raising 20 to 100K. You take 5%, and that's how you build a business out of it, right?
Yeah, but then how do you provide enough value to their supporters?
Got it.
And so some people will just do it out of the grace of their hearts, but the folks we interviewed mostly wanted access to the athlete, and that was the one thing the athletes didn't want to give.
Yeah, I think it's why you don't see tons of professional athletes on Patreon, right?
Right.
Because it ends up being a full-time job. Okay, so while we're on the topic of finance and fundraising, talk to me about the process of what it was even like to enable Movement to exist. How did you capitalize it? How did you think about bootstrapping versus fundraising and retaining ownership versus giving other people seats at the table? What did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any experience with fundraising before joining Movement. I think that I got great advice from somebody who actually used to be on my team who started his own super successful company, Trey Holterman at Tenor. And he told me to hire advisors and a co-founder for everything I didn't know how to do. And so I brought on a VC who I knew, who used to work at Strava as an advisor to help me navigate that process. I brought on Andrew Vance as a communications advisor to teach me how to do press releases and how to get people to be interested in our story.
He just messaged me on LinkedIn. What a serendipitous timing.
Yeah, there you go. And so, Movement is a venture capital backed business, but we are not trying to follow Strava's playbook to a T. Like Strava raised a ton of money. I don't even think it's public how much with the Run acquisition, but we have raised 2 rounds. We've raised a little over $3 million. And I am extremely grateful for the support of our investors for believing in the vision. But everyone is on the same page that we do not want to raise, like a series B, C, D, E, F and raise like $100 million like others in the space have. Because at the end of that, regardless of what happens from the business perspective, like investors will own 70, 80 or more % of your company. And so we're sort of splitting in the middle of like, this is not my second company. Like I can't just finance this myself. So we need enough to survive and to capture the opportunity. But I also really want employees to own most of Movement. And so we're sort of threading that needle carefully. And with this last round, we did an inside round from the folks who invested in our first round. And the reason we did that was we were fortunate to have lots of offers, but new investors wanted a ton of the company, like 15, 20 plus % of the company, whereas existing investors were willing to take a smaller piece. And so that was really the deciding factor there, was trying to manage that dilution.
So the ability for an existing investor to protect their initial investment versus having additional seats at the table is interesting and useful for both the investor as well as the company, because there's less communication, you have less people that you need to manage, and the initial investors are less worried about the dilution because they're getting more. But it's also like quite validating, right? That the initial people who put money in said, hey, I like the progress you've been making. I want to continue to do this.
Totally.
Can you talk more about that and why that was the case? And I'm asking because I think there will be people listening who are maybe interested in building a business, and the thought of having an investor return versus get new investors, maybe that's not something they've considered.
Yeah. I mean, I think that when possible, for all the reasons you described, it makes a lot of sense. I think that, you have to be realistic about, there's lots of different ways to get, capital for a business, but if you're talking about venture capital in particular, if you are interested in like having a lead of like a pre-seed also lead your seed, you have to look at their fund size and also like how much of the fund they've deployed. And you also just have to talk with the partner and be on the same page with them. You can also just look at how they've invested their portfolio previously. Like certain funds will save half of their capital for follow-on investments. And but if somebody's writing you a $2 million check out of a $20 million fund, chances are bad you're going to see any more of that $20 million fund because they're going to want to spread that out. Whereas, if you're like, we were a first check out of Underscore's fund, which was a really attractive part of that to us. We were like the first or second check out of their fund. And so then when we had all this traction, I think it was they invested out of a $60 million fund. It was a no-brainer for them to give us a couple million more bucks because they wanted to just like keep investing in the winners. But, if they had been 90% deployed through their fund on that first check. Like, regardless of how excited they are about the business, they wouldn't have been able to give us any more because they would have spent it all.
Do you feel that your approach is against the grain in San Francisco? Like the focus on employee owned versus raising tons and tons of money and growing at any cost?
Yes, I would say it is against the grain.
Why has that been your approach? And do you recommend it?
I mean, it's hard for me to recommend, my own ideas because it's like, yeah, I think it's a great idea. I'd say that honestly, the primary person who's influenced me in this regard is Michael Horvath from Strava. And I think if you keep raising, like Michael and I both have conviction that if we wanted to just keep raising forever and ever and, pour fuel on the fire and just grow, we probably could. But at the end of the day, like then my job will be managing investors.
Right.
I won't control the board. And so like at the end of the day, the investors will be running the company, not me. And what I love doing more than anything is building product and working on the product and, building software that makes people excited. And I think the way to have our cake and eat it too is to take the smallest amount of capital that we need in order to grasp the opportunity. And that's really tricky. Like if we ran out of money in a couple of years, I'd be like, man, I wish it took more. And you never know. You're balancing risk, but we're burning really slow. And before we actually raised this last round, we were operating in a cash flow positive way. So, I'm always thinking of like, okay, if our bank account went to zero, like how much profit would we have to operate with? But, we're burning really slow. Like we have years of runway now with our current burn. And so we're just trying to raise as little as possible to grasp that opportunity.
I love it. I think it's any validation against the raise as much money as possible and grow as fast as possible. Like I've seen that not work well. And we saw what happened in 2021 when money was free, and we seem to be entering another period where raising money is easier than it has been in the prior 2 or 3 years.